How about if I just start at the beginning? you could be honest.
Because you know what? They have the sweat equity that went into that memory that they're making with their friends and family. And that's what's important with us, and that's what the I Am Real World's about.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best things about a spring food plot is you get a second chance if it fails.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins, brought to you by buyafarm.com, your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. By tapping into Don's years of experience, dedication, and commitment, Chasing Giants focuses on the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails. Now, here is Don and co-host Terry Peer.
Well, welcome everybody, February 2nd, and we got episode 14 of Chasing Giants, brought to you by buyafarm.com. Good evening, Don. How's it going, buddy?
Good. How you, Terry?
I'm all right. It's only fitting that it's Super Bowl Sunday, and you and I are talking deer hunting and not worrying about this football game that everybody else is worried about.
Yeah, the football game's on right now, I think, and it's something that doesn't mean squat to me. I'm not a big NFL fan at all for a lot of things they stand for. And, in fact, they pretty much disgust me. So you'll never catch me watching an NFL game. I don't care if it's the Super Bowl or the toilet bowl.
Yeah, I mean, we both have our same opinion on that. But just to put things into perspective, it's kind of it kind of says a lot about what we live for and what we focus on, because it wouldn't matter really what was on TV right now. We'd probably be talking deer hunting.
That's true. That's true.
So February 2nd, we finished up January, the month of January. We had the ATA show that was very successful. And I know you've been on the road doing a lot of consulting. Have you had a chance to do much on your property yet?
Not on the property I own, but I've been out to some of the properties I hunt on. I've been slowly collecting trail cameras over the past couple of weeks, and I've even visited a couple of new properties, and one in particular, I found more big buck sign than I've ever found in my life, and about a 1 to 2 acre area. I bet there was 50 rubs on trees the size of your leg.
Wow.
And it wasn't soft pine trees or anything like that. It was hard hickory trees.
Wow.
It was actually, this buck was actually rubbing big hickory trees.
Wow.
The size of your leg, and I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen anything like it. And he was shredding them, and I got high hopes for that property. I mean, I don't know if the buck's still alive. Like I said, it's a new property, so but I suppose it probably is. I did move some trail cameras in there, hoping to get a photo or two before he sheds antlers.
Right. Well, speaking of shed antlers, I know we were chatting a little bit about what we've been doing, and you and I are kind of the same approach. There's people already out starting to try to pick up sheds and look, but we're going to hold off for at least another month and only do it one time. It's not worth it to me just to go out and maybe find one shed and walk the property and stomp it up, because, a lot of those deer still have their horns on their head right now.
Yeah. In fact, I bet 95% of the antlers are still on the buck's heads. And, I see it every year, some guy finds a shed or two and he posts it on social media, and all of a sudden the bucks are shedding. They're shedding early this year. And I compare it to the rut. Some guy sees a 1.5-year-old buck chasing a doe around in early October, and he gets on social media and he declares the rut started. And it's the same way with shed antlers. You need to be patient. You and I have talked a lot about passion versus discipline. And discipline is what it is that sets the successful hunters apart from the wannabes. And, you need to be disciplined to go out there now and try to find those handful of shed antlers that are scattered over a wide area. You're just doing more harm. You're busting them deer. You're pushing them off of the places where they want to be. And you're far better off just to let them go ahead and shed those antlers and go in one time later, like in mid-March or so, and gathering most of them that way.
Yeah, I mean, what's the risk? I mean, I know some of these guys that are shed hunting public ground. You know, that I guess that's a little bit different because other people might be in there walking it and they want to find them first. But on private land that you're the only one on, okay, you might have one chew mark in it from a squirrel or something. But what is there to gain by trumping up your property 3 and 4 times? You know, we talk about intrusion and security for these deer. This time of the year is no different than if we were in August and September and you're out scouting looking for sign.
Right. I mean, a low pressure approach is year round. Even on my home farm, I go looking for shed antlers one time each year, and I usually take a handful of friends with me so that we can really scour the place good, because I know we're running the deer off when we do it. And I'd rather just do it one time when 90% or more of the antlers are on the ground, and be done with it after that, and then let the deer come back and get comfortable again.
Right. Well, I've pulled all my cameras. I went in over the last 2 weeks, and now I have all of my cameras back here at the house now. For one simple reason, I know that the bucks that I'm going to possibly target next year are alive. And I don't need to get any more pictures of them. I just want to stay out. And here in Kentucky, we're allowed to supplemental feed. My soybeans are gone. The Deadly Dozen is still, I mean, they are still hammering on that. Believe it or not, as warm of weather as what we've had, the cereal grains are still really green. They keep them mowed off pretty good. But man, the beans are just destroyed, and I'm in a state that luckily I can throw the feed to them right now with high protein and high fat to try to keep them and hold over until, you know, that first green up of the clover comes the start of the year or start of the spring.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, I live in a state where we're not allowed to supplemental feed, but I do have a property in Ohio where we can, and you know, I need to get over there and check the feeders on the property. I got 3 feeders on that property. I try to keep full just to, you know, supplement the nutrition for the deer that live on that property.
Right. You know, it's let's talk a little bit about, I mean, we talk about feed and you know, I've always looked for a high fat, high protein type feed. That whether I'm putting, before I started, you know, we came out with the complete feed product a few years ago that I was, you know, pretty much the first beta site on wild deer here in Kentucky. But what does that high protein and high fat do from a deer health standpoint? You know, they've had the rut, they're run down, food sources are limited. What does, instead of just throwing just a straight corn out there, what does high protein and high fat supplements do for them right now?
Well, you know, this is the time of the year when food sources are the most scarce, especially high quality food sources. In a lot of areas, deer right now are living on nothing but browse, and browse is mainly fiber. There's very little fat, very little protein in it. It's just a survival diet. So if we want to get our deer to, you know, have the maximum fawn production and maximum antler growth, we need to give them the maximum nutrition we possibly can 365 days a year. You know, when a buck grows his antlers, he's pulling reserves from his skeletal system to do that. And those need to be replenished at some time. And, you know, they get replenished at other times of the year when he's not growing his rack. So it's real important to have a high quality diet in front of those deer at all times.
So is it fair to say that, okay, let's say a buck is coming out of the rut, gone through the winter, he has to rebound from being run down. I mean, we see some of these bucks, they can lose as much as 50 pounds, you know, from running through November and December, right?
Oh, easily.
So is it fair to say that if we can help put that weight back on and help build that buck back and recover it, that the diet that they start eating as antler growth, they're not catching up during antler growth season. We've already helped them catch up earlier, that more energy, more nutrition then goes to, for the does, the fawn production, the lactation, and in the bucks in the antler growth. Is there any truth to that logic?
Well, yes and no. My experience with captive deer, I had the small research herd of captive whitetails for over 20 years. And, what I found was that once those bucks lost the weight, it was hard to put it back on during the winter months. And the reason for that was the deer's feed intake really drops off in the winter. That they eat only a fraction of what they eat like in late summer.
Okay.
In fact, it goes down to like almost a quarter. A deer eats, a buck especially eats about a quarter in the winter on average, as he does in late summer, early fall when he's really putting the fat on.
Okay.
And that makes it even more important that you have a high quality diet in front of those deer, because the little bit of food that they do take in needs to be the highest quality possible.
Gotcha. Because the consumption rate is so down, so the quality has to be there in order to help them. Yeah, it makes sense. Yep. And minerals,
but you
go ahead.
But you are replenishing those nutrients that have been lost, through the rut, through the antler growing cycle from the previous year. You're building that deer up so that he can, once he sheds, and spring hits, he can start growing that next rack.
Right. I know mineral consumption is not too far away from that conversation, because, the deer don't hit mineral this time of year near as much as what they do in the summer, but they still hit it, and it's them going to it for what they need at that point in time, right?
Right. An animal has a amazing ability to crave what it needs. If you've ever been or seen a horse pasture where the horses have like eaten the bark off the trees, they've started eating the wood on the fence or the barn or whatever.
Yeah,
that's a nutrient deficiency, and that livestock, that horse or whatever it is, I've seen it with cattle as well. They are craving some nutrient that they don't have in their diet and don't have it available. And that's what causes them to eat the bark off the trees. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have probably seen that situation. It's a nutrient deficiency that animal is trying to replenish. So I think it's important to have mineral out there in states where it's legal, so that those bucks and does can take in what they need and what they crave.
Now since you sent me Maximizer Mineral the year before it was ever even released, you guys had tested it on captive deer, but had never really seen it any use with wild deer. And at that point in time, my friend and I, we used a ton of another mineral, and it's an okay mineral. It wasn't a high salt based, but at that point in time, we really started tracking fawn production. And, I run enough cameras on different farms that I actually have statistical data. I'm a marketing guy, so my whole college career was about statistics, where if you're running enough cameras, especially when you have feed and mineral, you can get different camera angles to really find out how many fawns those does are carrying. And more of my does are carrying twins, and I've even had triplets now a few years. Is there any tie nutritionally to what we're doing that's also helping those does with the fawn production based on their intake and nutrients this time of year, or is it later on in the year?
Well, actually, you bring up a very interesting point. And
for the listeners, I'm putting him on the spot because we didn't rehearse this question. So
yeah,
I'm putting him on the spot here.
Yeah, that's for sure. I wasn't expecting that one, but it's a good discussion to have. And, there's something called fetal programming. And it's been studied in livestock a lot, and in deer some, but really in livestock. And what they found through university trials is that once an animal is born, you cannot make up for the nutrition it did not get as a fetus. So, in other words, there was one study done at the Oregon State University on cattle, and it involved thousands and thousands of head of pregnant cows, and both cows got well balanced, or both groups of cows got well balanced diets, but one group got additional mineral supplementation. And just about every livestock farmer in the country is using mineral with their livestock. But what they showed in this trial was that the calves that were born to those cows that had the extra mineral, those calves performed better throughout their entire life. The other calves could never catch up to them. The calves that were born to those cows with mineral supplementation, they were healthier, they gained weight faster, they had better feed conversion. In other words, it took less feed to put a pound of gain on them. And there was just no way for that other group to ever catch up, no matter what was fed to them later in life. And the same thing has been shown in whitetails. So fetal programming is very important. So, I hear guys say, I started using, whatever brand of mineral, and I could see my bucks were instantly bigger, and it just don't happen that way. You just, I don't care, even if you're using Maximizer, which I think is the very best mineral out there available. Even Maximizer, you can't just throw it out and instantly your bucks are going to be bigger.
But the fawns that are being born with that in their system, you're making a difference for those deer down the road.
Absolutely. Yep.
So their potential is bigger. So this is for everybody that thinks that somebody's selling snake oil. This is a guy who owns a company selling mineral that is being brutally honest with how the anatomy and biology of these animals work. So and I've heard people have sent in messages to us saying we switched to Maximizer this year and their deer are bigger this year. And it's probably because the buck's older. That's why it was bigger. Yeah.
But for a nutrition program for any of our listeners who's trying to manage a wild herd and they're doing so in a state where they're allowed to supplemental feed and put feed mineral out, you're really not going to, it's impossible. You're not going to see the full effect of your program for at least 5 years. So if you start feeding it, say this year, we're getting towards the end of that gestation cycle for the does. I mean, we're probably halfway through it. So you might have a little bit of impact on these doe or these fawns that are going to be born this coming spring. But your big impact is going to be on the fawns that are not even conceived yet. You build that doe system up, and then she gets bred this fall, and then she's on a high nutrition program throughout her gestation period. Then she has those fawns. Those fawns are going to be the ones that are best able to maximize their genetic potential. It's going to take.
It ties back to me being the beta side of this mineral 6 and 7 years ago.
Yep.
About why I'm seeing it now.
Exactly. So, the fawns that are not even conceived yet, by the time they reach, an age where they could be considered trophy buck, 4, 5, 6 years old, you're looking 5 to 7 years down the line before that's going to happen.
Right.
So, again, I own a company that sells deer mineral, and I think it's the best one on the market, but I'm telling you, it's a long-term program. You don't just go out there and throw it on the ground and boom, this summer your bucks are bigger than they were last summer.
But we're talking right now though just with antler growth pretty much. Let's take a step back though, because we've already talked about how the deer will cut back on how much they eat, whether it's mineral or feed. The other stuff that is in the mineral that we have and that same nutritional properties are in the complete feed. for overall just herd health with the probiotics, with the other, that type of stuff has an immediate health impact on the deer, though, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So, I mean,
Sure.
our conversations usually steer, directly to the size of the antler and how old they are. But for the overall health of the herd, I don't want people to think that, well, it's a lost cause if it's only going to help me 5-6 years from now. I mean, all of those macro and micronutrients that are in Maximizer are improving the overall herd health. But what we're talking about is to truly see statistical data. I mean, there's only one way really you would know, antler growth, and that's having 2 buck fawn twins, and you feed them completely different, which you've done before, to separate out the genetics of it and feed one with mineral. It does make an impact. But wild deer, that's a little bit different ballgame.
Yeah, and I should back up a little bit. You're going to see the maximum benefit from your nutrition program 5-6 years down the road. You're going to, I don't know that it's going to be that noticeable, but you are going to see a little bit of a benefit each year, and it just kind of builds, and compounds itself each year. But, for these guys saying, I started feeding this kind of mineral and all of a sudden my bucks are bigger. Well, the bucks are bigger because they're a year older. That's why they're bigger. Bucks in the wild with no supplement whatsoever get bigger every year. And that's not it. I think, the first year you put it out, the benefit that you do to them deer is going to be so minor that you're not going to be able to notice it.
Yeah, makes sense.
But, after 5 years, I fully believe from, when I had the researcher, I would do my own studies, and they weren't scientific where they could, pass the sniff test of, a scientific journal or anything like that. There just weren't enough animals involved for that. But, one thing that my studies basically focused on nutrition and genetics. Those were 2 things that really interest me. And, I think, I know without a doubt that nutrition can help take your antler growth to the next level. And I believe over a 5-year period, a good nutrition program that includes supplemental feed and mineral supplementation, I think you can have about a 15% increase in the gross antler score of mature bucks. So in other words, that 150-inch buck, he's pushing 170. And that's on average. Some of them are going to respond better than others. But
we're never going to turn a 150 genetic inch deer into a 220. We're not going to overcome that, but we can put more mass and a little bit, possibly a frame, just in 15% is still 15%, whatever the potential of that deer could have been.
Yeah. If people don't gain anything else from this conversation, I hope they'll do a little research on fetal programming.
Fetal programming.
It's why when a woman goes to the doctor and finds out she's pregnant, the doctor puts her on all these prenatal vitamins,
right?
Because once that animal is born, whether it be a human or a deer or a cow or whatever, you cannot make up for what it did not get as a fetus.
So the nutrition that it's receiving while it's in the womb is going to set the tone or the pathway of what the potential is of that deer or human, maybe 15, 16 years later in a human, but in a deer 4, 5, 6 years later, that's all done while that's in the womb of that doe.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Now,
the genetics are not going to change. Think of it as people, you get somebody who's genetically predispositioned to be 5 foot 6 inches tall, and it doesn't matter what you feed that person, they're never going to be 6 foot.
Right.
However, if they are malnourished, they may only be 5'2".
Right.
And all we can do is maximize that genetic potential.
Yeah, it makes sense.
We can't push past it.
So when we're talking about supplemental feeding, real quick before we move on, a lot of guys just feed corn, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What are we looking for in that supplemental feed program that's beyond corn, and walk us through that a little bit.
Well, corn is basically nothing but it's about 8% protein at the highest, 7 to 8%, which is about half what a deer needs. No, very little fat, if any. It's more of a starch, carbohydrate. It'll get deer through the winter. It'll certainly attract them to a camera or a feeder or whatever. But it's more of an energy that fuels that animal from day to day. It's not more for production. You need fat levels that are up there, and you need protein levels that are up there. Then you need the minerals and vitamins. And what's really important, while we're talking about this, I don't think either one of us planned to get off onto this topic this deep, but what sets Maximizer apart from other minerals and why I think it's the best on the market. First of all, it contains over 20 different nutrients. I don't know that there's another mineral marketed to deer hunters that contain as many different nutrients. But what's really, really important about it is not just the levels of those nutrients, but certain nutrients need to be in the specific ratios to each other. One that's pretty common is calcium and phosphorus. So your calcium level should be in a 2-to-1 ratio with your phosphorus. There should be twice as much calcium as there is phosphorus. Another one is copper and zinc, which should be in a 4-to-1 ratio. And then there's others. So, Maximizer was not just a hodgepodge of things thrown together in a local feed mill and marketed to deer hunters. There's science behind it. It's specific levels, but also specific ratios of over 20 different nutrients.
Right. So, consulting business is keeping you pretty busy. I saw that you were going to be heading even out, was it New England or somewhere out on the East Coast, I think, coming up?
Yeah, towards the end of the month, I'm going as far east as Massachusetts.
All right. So do you, I know we got a email in on the Real World site the other day of somebody wanting you to do it. Are you completely booked now, or do you still have some openings if it's in the right direction of where you're already traveling?
Well, I could maybe work in another one or two. It's all going to depend on the spring. If we get an early spring and things green up early and I got to quit early, I probably about got what I can handle. But so I've got that trip out east that's probably going to take me at least a week to 10 days. I got to go. I got to make a stop in Ohio, New York, 2 stops in Pennsylvania, and then Massachusetts. And I've got a couple other people that I don't know for sure. They've been emailing me back and forth. I don't have commitments for sure from them on that same trip out east. This coming week, I'm going to be in Iowa and Missouri. The following week, I'm going to be in Wisconsin. I'm going to be doing a seminar in Wisconsin February 15th at our distributor up there, Extreme Custom Food Plots. If we got any listeners from Wisconsin that might be interested in attending, you can get on the Real World website or social media, probably the Facebook page is where they would find that information.
Yep.
Or just drop me an email and I'd be glad to forward you some information on that event. But yeah, I've got a pretty full slate, and I was just telling my wife earlier today, for the next 2 months, I'm not going to be spending too many days at home.
Yeah. So if people are still interested in having you walk their property, go ahead and email Don on Higgins Outdoors website, and it might be something that he can work you in if it's in the direction that he's going. So how about let's move on to the BuyAFarm.com property of the week.
BuyAFarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
All right, this week's featured property is 64 acres in Wayne County, Illinois, near Fairfield. This 64 acres is at the end of a dead-end road. It's got a modular home, fairly new modular home, built was new in 2003, so it's less than 20 years old. There's a 40 by 50 pole building, 30 by 40 metal garage with concrete floor, 2-acre pond that is stocked. It includes 33 acres of timber, a lot of wildlife, not only deer, but turkey and waterfowl, places for food plots. There's rural water on the property. Taxes are cheap, $290 a year taxes on that home, which would make a great hunting camp. So you're not going to find taxes any cheaper than that for a home on 64 acres. If you're interested in this property, the agent you want to contact is Don Bailey. Don's phone number is 618-919-1031. And again, it's 64 acres, Wayne County, Illinois. I don't think it's too far off of Interstate 64. So you're looking for
the nice part about this one is it has a place to stay and a place to lock up all your equipment. So the guys that are wanting for like you said, a hunting camp, it's already got established buildings on it that you could store all of your stuff over there.
Yeah, it'd make a great hunting camp. I mean, there's 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, central air, propane heat. So you'd be set. It's even got rural water, so you don't have to worry about a well or anything like that.
Yeah, good deal. Is this one on the buyafarm.com website?
It is. Go to buyafarm.com, look for 64 acres in Wayne County, Illinois, and give Don Bailey a call.
Fantastic. So, before we move on to the listener submitted questions, let's talk just a little bit about how you are using QuietKat this time of year. And we've talked a lot about using it to get in and out of our stands or check our trail cameras. When you're going out and, like you said, retrieving your trail cameras, or you're going out and trying to cover a lot of ground, is that one of the tools that you're even utilizing this time of year?
Well, I probably shouldn't share this on social media, but I'll be honest. The way I use my QuietKat more than anything is to throw off those people who are always looking for my truck or looking to follow me in hopes of, leading them to a big buck themselves.
Yeah.
It seems like, since 2017, when I shot Smokey and Trump on those back-to-back hunts, I've gotten a lot more attention, and I've had to be a little sneakier about where I park my truck and such. And that QuietKat, I can throw it in the back of the truck. Nobody knows it's back there, and then park somewhere, make people think I'm hunting somewhere I'm not, jump on that QuietKat and ride across the field or down the road a couple miles, and they don't even know I'm on the property that I'm really hunting.
Very cool.
So that's what I'm doing with QuietKat more than anything.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We're really excited about. They came up with a new design this year that we both really like. That's got a direct drive and not has that changing sprocket on the back side. So when we're cutting across those open fields, not having to worry about bean stubble or corn stalks jumping in there and popping the chain off. Pretty cool design that they just came out. If you want to see more about that, they've started posting a lot of that on their social media, so check them out at the Instagram page on QuietKat. So pretty good stuff. So let's move on to the listener submitted questions. I think you have a few of them for today that you've chosen.
Yeah, I've got a couple. They're both pretty long, so bear with me as I read these. The first one is from Jordan Bashford from Urbana, Illinois. Jordan says, I have several places where I plan to harvest trees on my property this year. The treetops will likely be left behind as well. My timber is predominantly old-growth timber. This should open up some nice places for sunlight to reach the forest floor. What would you recommend doing with these places? Plant switchgrass for bedding within the timber, plant food plots, leave them alone to allow native undergrowth to take over, or maybe a combination. This is a long question, and this is just part of it. I got more to read, but I want to answer this before I read the rest of it. Switchgrass is not going to work in an area like this. Switchgrass, it needs an open field. It needs total sunlight, and it is not going to compete with trees that are already established. So
I'm
in an area like this,
I'm glad you're talking about this because we get this question like once a week on
Yep.
the Real World site. Yeah,
I can't tell you how many times I've answered that question. And you cannot plant switchgrass in wooded cover like this. What you want to do, and cutting timber is a good thing, but there's a couple of approaches to it. Most foresters are looking at timber production, and they don't want to cut a forest too hard. They want to cut what's mature and ready while leaving the next crop. However, as a deer hunter, you want to cut it really hard because the more sunlight you can get in, the better, because the more undergrowth that's going to, or regeneration that you're going to have. Those weeds and briars and saplings and such that are going to come on when the sunlight hits the forest floor. So the more sunlight you got in, the better. As far as the treetops, I just leave them where they fall. Have the logger come in and do its thing, and wherever he leaves the treetops is fine because the deer will bed within those treetops. That gives them cover instantly, even before that new regeneration of growth takes place. So just leave them there. Going back to his question, did you have anything you would want to add there, Terry?
Well, I think the example that I've seen you is last year when we were shed hunting a section of your property. You're only in there once a year, and the first thing that you said is, this is too open in here. I'm going to have to drop a couple trees to get the canopy out so that it grows up because I don't know if I'm paraphrasing or you said it, but you said, this big open timber that you can literally see all the way across is useless.
Right. You need that ground cover not only to keep the deer secure and provide good bedding cover, but it's good browse. They love to eat it too. So there's two good reasons to have it. And, mature bucks, they just like thick cover. So you need it on your property.
Right.
So moving on, Jordan goes on to say, is it important to have all different timber types on your land, old growth, new growth, and something in between? Yes, absolutely. Like I was just on a property earlier this week, and I advised that it was I forget how many acres of woods, close to 200 acres of wooded cover. And I suggested that they cut a section of it, a quarter of it each year for the next 5 years, or space them 5 years apart. In other words, timber a quarter of that property really hard this year, wait 5 years, then timber the next quarter really hard, wait 5 years. And the reason for that is you don't have your entire property maturing at the same time.
Right.
You got different stages of growth. So that is important to stagger that. And so he goes on to say, I have recently heard of people broadcasting switchgrass within their timbers to increase cover for deer. Have you ever done this? It seems like switchgrass wouldn't do well in shady conditions. Additionally, how well does switchgrass grow in bottom ground? Oh, we've already covered that. It does terrible in a wooded area. It's a waste of your time and your seed and your money. So don't try to plant it in a wooded area. How well does it grow in bottom ground? It does fantastic in bottom fields, even fields that occasionally flood. But it cannot be a timber. If it's an open, field, it'll do fine in a bottom. Anything to add there, Terry?
One of the biggest questions we get is what kind of bedding grasses can I put in bottoms or river bottoms or creek bottoms that flood every year or, it comes up. I think we have to be a little bit careful about people saying which variety of switchgrass or which variety of CRP, which CRP is a term that's misused a lot. That's a program. That's not a product. But like the bedding in a bag has varieties of grasses in it that won't do well in wet conditions. But the switchgrass variety alone that we have will be fine in those areas and do very well. I just think people need to be a little bit careful that we're not saying all bedding grasses or all products that are sold under CRP programs will do well in flooded areas. I think that's a little bit of too much of a generalization that people have.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, because deer hunters seem to use generalized terms and they misuse those terms. And like switchgrass is misused. They think any tall grass is switchgrass, and it's not. So you need to make sure that you understand before you embark on one of these projects. You understand exactly what it is you're planning, and if it'll do well on the site. And
yep, good point.
Yep. So move on to the next question. Next question comes from Ben Allgood from Gonzales, Louisiana. And this is another long one, so I'm going to, instead of reading it all and having to go back and refine those questions, I'm going to take a little bit at a time. So Ben says, I just found your podcast and listened to all the episodes over the last 2 days. Love them. Keep up the good work. My family lives in Louisiana, but for the past few years, we leased property in Kentucky. After seeing that we could buy a small farm for the price of leasing, we decided to take that route. And I'm going to stop right there. That is a observation that Terry and I have commented on in the past. BioFarm is our sponsor, and you can buy a property oftentimes for a similar cost to leasing. And you're building up equity in that property. You own it. You got 100% control over it. And I get so many questions personally on social media and emails and phone calls and everything else. I mean, I could make a list as long as my arm of people calling me to lease ground. And for whatever reason, people will lease way more than they're willing to buy. And that's a huge mistake financially, because you gain nothing from it. At the end of the hunting season, what do you got? The money you spend on that lease is gone. You're never going to have it back. So, Ben made the decision to buy a piece of ground. I think it was a great decision, and I think more people should consider that. Just going to move on. He says, we purchased 41 acres last January. 40% was just grass hay ground that offered no food. 2 deep wooded hollows extend and end in something like arrow points into the property. Being an absentee landowner, I tried to get a local farmer to plant a screen by the road frontage in exchange for haying it. The screen was never planted, so I ended up with a wide open view to the road fields. I tried to salvage by broadcasting cereal rye into the stubble in 2 different half-acre areas in September, but that was a bust because of planting method and no rain for over 40 days. We can only visit the property when the kids are on break, which happens to be the second weekend in April, Labor Day weekend in September, and second week of October, and the week of Thanksgiving. I'm really tempted to plant all the fields into a pollinator blend and pay a local farmer to put in 2 half-acre food plots. My question is, considering the dates we are able to hunt, would it make more sense to plant more food and less cover, or more cover and less food? I'd like for our family to be able to have the opportunity to kill 1 mature buck every year or 2. There's really not a lot of food in the area. It's mostly wooded with ridgetop hay fields in the immediate area, and alfalfa doesn't seem to be grown in this area of south central Kentucky. First of all, his question is a good one. More cover and less food, or more food and less cover? You've got to look. I tell my consulting clients this all the time. You got to look beyond your property at what is in shortest supply in the area.
Absolutely.
What's the weakest link? So, where I'm at, cover is the weakest link. The more cover I can put on my property, the more deer I'm going to have. Because I live in a sea of agriculture. Around me is giant corn and soybean fields.
South Central Kentucky's not going to be that way.
Exactly. And that's where I was going next. Where Terry's at is totally the opposite. The weakest link in your area is food. And the more food that you can provide, the more deer you're going to have. Wouldn't you agree, Terry?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you always got to look at the weakest link. There is no hard and fast rules on which is better.
You need both, though. You got to have both. I mean, let's
Right.
just face it, you got to have both. But
Yep.
but the ratio and his scenario really brings out the question, a way to make your wheels spin, though, is how much of each do I have? And unless you're looking at your property as one box on a checkers board, and you have to look at all those other boxes to find out what your plan should be to get those deer on you, you can't just make a decision just for your one little box.
Right. So, you got to look beyond your property boundaries. A lot of places, a lot of properties, especially in the rougher terrain like Kentucky you're talking about, there's just not a lot of flat areas for growing food plots. So I think you should take advantage of all the agriculture you can get on your property. 2 half-acre food plots is really not much at all. If you've got several acres, it doesn't really say here how many acres you have in all. But I would have as many acres of food as I could possibly get. And then the other areas, I would maximize their potential as bedding cover, make them as thick as possible, and stay out of them, just hunt the edges. That's the best advice I could give you.
I mean,
for that
reading
property.
into this a little bit, I'm making a few assumptions, because he said that the farmer said he was going to plant a screen, but he never did, and said that from the road he could see back into the field. So there's got to be, it's got to at least be half open to where he could put in a pretty good sized food plot. But right there, whether he's planting field corn or maybe even the new miscanthus that we've talked about out by the road, that would be an option. But there's 2 other key points in here that myself as an out-of-state hunter to Illinois that I plan on, and how I set my farm up here in Kentucky based on when I want to hunt is very specific. And he said, well, when did he say his kids were off and that they're able to come up and hunt? I think I heard second week of October, right?
Second week of October and Labor Day weekend. Don't you guys
Thanksgiving
have an early
weekend?
season?
Yeah, Labor Day weekend. That's the opener of archery season. So, by being able to hunt opening week of archery season, opening weekend, it's evening hunts only. It's really hot, but those deer are still in bachelor groups. You have a shot at a velvet buck, but you talk about a pattern where you're hunting basically the last 45 minutes of daylight. And I plan my farm every year to try to kill the first 2 weekends of September, just so I can focus on the kids hunting here later in the year, and then me hunting November and December usually in Illinois. So food source, obviously, when you're talking about Labor Day weekend, food. Soybeans, clover, freshly planted Deadly Dozen, all going to be the best spots for that. I think he said the second week of October. The second week of October is always youth rifle weekend in Kentucky. It's Saturday and Sunday. So plan for that. It's usually really hot. You're getting into the October lull. It's hit and miss. Not a really good time to hunt. But again, that's going to be primarily evening hunts over food, right?
Yep.
Thanksgiving week, we're still in rifle season here. We open up the first weekend in November and go through Thanksgiving. So he's still there. There you're going to be in the rut. Then you're going to have different stand locations for hunting. The buck's probably coming off the first round of does that were hot, cruising for something that's left. So they're probably right after lockdown. So understand the hunting seasons and when and how you're going to hunt, and then you can put a plan together on it. I'm not sure I understand the comment about alfalfa, because alfalfa is grown all over the state. It's just alfalfa needs a ton of lime, and our state doesn't have much. So you have to invest a lot of money anywhere. We have bad clay here. And depending on where he's at, I'm not sure exactly. I know I'm north of him. I'm in northern Kentucky. But there's alfalfa all over the state. So alfalfa is an option, but you're going to have to put a lot of money into the ground, and some farmer is going to have to keep that mowed. Alfalfa is great. I raise alfalfa on my property. It takes a lot of the pressure off the beans, but it's high maintenance. I mean, you have to mow it, you have to bale it, get it off of there, and it's a great food source. I hunt it every spring, or excuse me, every fall and early season. But being an out-of-state hunter, I don't know, unless you had a farmer that you really trusted that was going to take care of that, I don't know that that would be the best solution for you.
Yep. Well, there you go, Ben. You just heard from one of the best hunters in Kentucky. So,
Ben,
I think it's pretty
Ben,
solid
if you want to reach out to me directly, I might be able to point you to something, but I would guess you need to get a local farmer to put in a food plot, and I would definitely consider more than 2 half-acre plots. So,
for sure.
All right.
All right. Well, that's the last submitted question for this episode. Keep sending those questions in. You go to chasinggiants.com. There's a form there to fill out with your question. Make sure you fill it out completely so we have your mailing address. That way, if we select your question, we'll send you a free Chasing Giants t-shirt. And this week we'll be sending one out to Ben Allgood from Gonzales, Louisiana, and Jordan Bashford from Urbana, Illinois.
All right, good stuff. Well, Don, I'm going to ask you to take us out and thank our sponsors for today, but I guess happy Super Bowl Sunday, even though we didn't watch the thing. So hope everybody
Who's playing?
I'd have no idea. Chiefs 49ers, I do know that.
Okay.
So why don't you take us out for us, buddy?
All right. As we close out, we want to thank our sponsors, BuyAFarm.com, 360 Hunting Blind, Real World Wildlife Products, Lone Wolf Stand, Vortex Optics, Matthews Archery, and Quiet Cat. See you next time.
See ya.